Take two. It's preparing my live stream. It is. All right. And I'm not sure how subscription rooms work. So it may be that if we ping people to the room and they're not a subscriber, they can't come in. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure how that works, but anyway, we're gonna be live streaming this and posting it up on YouTube. So welcome everyone back to CEO School. As I said, we are here today with Natasha Andrews, Esquire, attorney extraordinaire. She is the founder, president, CEO of both Evergreen Solutions and the National Association of Black Cannabis Lawyers. Super excited to have her here with us today. And so, Natasha, I just want to introduce you and let you have the floor. If you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and about your two organizations. And I apologize, but you're not live on Zoom. We can't hear you on Zoom. So if you can switch over to Zoom, I'd appreciate it.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah, so now you have to mute yourself on, did you mute yourself on Fanbase?
I did.
Okay, there you go. Now that works. Can you still hear her, Hayes? Say something, Natasha.
Can you hear me?
Hayes, can you hear her? Yeah. Okay, all right. So if you can do that introduction one more time, and then I'll get into my questions.
You know, we said take two, but we all know that the third time is the charm. So here goes again.
Yes.
By the time we're done with this, you all will be able to do it for me. Yes, I am Natasha Andrews. Thank you so much for having me here on CEO School once again. I was talking to you about my two companies, the first being Evergreen Solutions. Evergreen Solutions is a cannabis consulting firm, and we work with people throughout the country to assist them with transitioning into the legal cannabis market. And that looks very different. All 50 states look very, very different when it comes to cannabis and where we are. And we help people to obtain licenses, to maintain compliance, to recognize a steady supply chain. And one of the most fascinating things is working with folks to decide whether they want to be in a plant touching space or work through an ancillary project. And I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more detail about what those ancillary projects look like a little bit later. My other organization is the National Association of Black Cannabis Lawyers, and that is definitely a passion project for me. We work a lot with advocacy throughout the country. We work with helping to set the tone for legislation, and we work both with restorative justice and sensible drug reform objectives. We have some amazing and fascinating partners out there that work with us on projects. We do a lot of education for attorneys in this space. And most importantly, we want to make sure that as we develop a legal platform on a national level, that we don't forget a lot of the history behind how cannabis came to be the demonized plant that it is today, and a lot of people who have paved the way to allow for legalization to be where it is.
I love it. It's interesting because we were talking about this earlier, and conversations like this normally attract people that are more interested in smoking the plant, as opposed to people that are interested in building businesses around the plant. And I really wanted to talk to you today about really the business of cannabis, because I think it's really fascinating how many different areas you can get into. I know one of the places that we did not discuss but because Hayes is here in the fan base room today, I wanted to kind of ask a question around childbirth and cannabis, because I wonder if there is a use for cannabis in the doula space, or, in the birthing space. I know that, it's not good to smoke it, but is there, are there things that people are using cannabis for in that space? And Hayes, feel free to hop in and share with us. Hmm. Wow. Mm. Wow. So I just threw that out there. We had no conversation about this, Natasha, earlier, about the birthing space, but I saw Hayes and I was like, I bet you, because we were literally talking about the fact that every industry that you can think of pretty much can come up with a way to use cannabis. Natasha, remember we were having that conversation? So I just thought this was interesting. So have you ever heard about cannabis being used in the birthing space, Natasha?
So it's interesting because I think you touched on a couple of things. And to answer your question, the most immediate question is I have not. But that's one of the things that I actually really love about cannabis is that I'm not afraid at all to tell people that my inclusion in the cannabis space does not make me an expert on all things cannabis because it is so widespread, right? There are medicinal uses, there are cosmetic uses, there are industrial uses, there are consumption uses. There are just so many different areas to be involved in cannabis. So I find the whole thing very fascinating. What I will say is that you also talked a little bit about the consumption piece versus the business side of it. And people
Hmm.
often confuse the two and thinking that they necessarily lend one into the other when they're actually two very distinctive things. You don't have to be a consumer to be involved in the business. And you don't have to be involved in the business to be a consumer. I don't, know how to formulate Pepsi, but I drink it, right? So
Right.
it's not necessary that I know how to run the company in order to consume it. And people somehow make a distinction when it comes to cannabis with specifically with regards to the medical uses and implication. It's long been known that cannabis is phenomenal for pain management, despite the fact that our country chose to adopt a platform that said it was a Schedule One drug with no value, no medicinal value, that was highly addictive and was a gateway. We know that those things aren't true, but that's sort of the rhetoric that started out in the 30s and has kind of taken us to where we are here today, which is, again, for me, a great part of the advocacy. It's that education piece. It's letting people know what this is and what it isn't, because I think a lot of us have grown up with a false understanding of what cannabis is. Um, In addition to that, we talk a lot about not having studies. I know that Hayes just mentioned not having the studies, and I want to be very careful to indicate that modern US research, FDA, states that they don't have the studies, right? But
Hmm.
we have to recognize that this is not a new plant. This didn't show up 30 years ago. It didn't show up 100 years ago. We talk a lot about the legalization of cannabis, but I always coin the phrase re-legalization because this was already legal. This was here before we were here, right?
Re-legalization. I like that word,
It's
re-legalization.
not something that has always been banned. It is something that has always been here. And so there are people out there that have done studies. They know how to use this in birthing, in management of anxiety, in management of pain, and all different types of usages. It's just that we don't necessarily recognize it under the system that we use here in the US at this time. So we have to be careful when we say that no one knows, or there are no studies, or there is no information. And we have to recognize that we kind of did that to ourselves. We cut ourselves off from the knowledge that we could have had we not gone down this road of banning it to begin with. Um,
Mhm.
that said, the wonderful thing about this time and space is the advances in medicine and in technology allow us to learn all of the stuff that we've foregone for so long at a rapid speed, right? And so that is the blessing and the curse. You have corporate America entering into a space that is holistic. And those things don't necessarily pair together or haven't in the past. So it's really interesting to see how that unfolds and what kind of knowledge we're able to acquire and what we do with that knowledge at this point.
Wow, this is super fascinating to me. Because I've always grown up just seeing cannabis as a gateway drug, right? So I've avoided it my whole life. And I'm 48 years old. So I've learned so much, from you, Natasha, but also just in the last year, um, from different people, just having really, really candid conversations about cannabis, and just, starting to reimagine it and think of it in a different way. You talked a little bit about restorative justice and how that's part of the NABCL's platform. So can you tell us a little bit about restorative justice and why that's important?
Well, I mean, that is definitely at the heart of why I founded the NABCL. I'll be honest with you, I was actually practicing as an immigration attorney when I came into this cannabis space. Much like you, I grew up very, just say no, Nancy Reagan. I laugh because I used to be a dare dancer. Okay, like I literally went
Wow.
out and performed in the world as a dancer on behalf of Dare, trying to encourage kids to stay away from drugs. And much like you, I grew up with that sense that cannabis is just one, cannabis and crack, they were all the same, right? They're just exactly the same because they're all drugs, they're all bad.
Yeah.
And needless to say, as an attorney, when I came into this space, there was a ton of apprehension. I'm like, I can't let people know this is what I'm doing. Like, there's so much shame here. So it's been a learning experience for me as well. But the restorative justice piece drew me in because as an immigration attorney, I often came across people who were detained and removed, sometimes permanently, from this country. And these are people who were separated from their families. At the time, it didn't resonate with me because it was just another crime, right? So they committed a crime and they got detained, and that ultimately led to their deportation. Not great for me as an immigration attorney looking to serve this population, but they could have carjacked someone or robbed someone. It was just another crime.
Right.
Um, but a lot of times these were non-violent, low-level offenders who weren't like major drug dealers. These were people who were caught with, two joints in their car. And it
Hmm.
never really, the impact never really aligned to me, with the crime. The punishment did not fit the crime in my mind. But again, I went about my day-to-day life and functioned in that space. And it wasn't until I had an opportunity to go out to Seattle. I was in Arizona at the time, and when I went out to Seattle, where it was booming and thriving and legal, I saw a very different face, and it was shocking to me. People, you walk down the street, there are people smoking, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is the forbidden leaf. This is
Like, what are we doing? I
oh,
remember that. I remember
know that other
when,
people can smell it.
right. I remember when it was first legal, like I was probably the worst. I literally was like, okay, listen, I need you guys to like stop. I really need you guys to do that at home. Stop like subjecting the world to your drug use. Like in my mind, that's what was happening. And I was like, I'm smelling it everywhere. I remember going to, I went to a concert. Who was it? It was Brian Knight and it was Charlie Wilson. And I remember telling the person I was with at the time that, oh my God, I can't stay. Like I've got to go because these people are just they're just being so disrespectful and they're just smoking and I'm gonna go find a cop and I'm gonna go tell them. Like I was so like just oh my God, and you don't think about the conditioning. Okay, now I'll say I still don't like the smell, but it was more about the conditioning in my mind of this being drug use,
Right.
right? And I
Maybe
was just like, this is drug use. Like, there's no way that these people think it's okay for them to just be out here just smoking all willy nilly in front of people and not, hiding it. So it's interesting.
and that's exactly how propaganda is designed to work. And although there are powers that be that don't like the association with propaganda, that's exactly what it is. If you look at the history of the initial war on drugs, the condemnation of cannabis in this nation, what you find is that it was orchestrated intentionally to be divisive and to do exactly what it did. There were undesirable portions of our population, according to certain people, and they wanted those people shut down.
Hmm.
Specifically Mexicans, people of African descent, and those hippie anti-war protesters. They were three groups in this country that needed to be taken down a peg, so to speak. And so originally under Nixon, but certainly fostered under Reagan, this whole movement to make those undesirable people go away. Now, this takes me to a whole other place because there's another element of it that deals with privatized prisons. That,
Hmm.
that's another conversation for another day, but that really also fueled and fed into how we came to demonize this plant. But when you think about it, when you step away from that propaganda and what we have to now unlearn, what you realize is there is a plant in nature. If I can take a drug prescribed by the pharmaceutical, by a doctor that is being pushed by the pharmaceutical industry, knowing full well that in 2 years there's going to be some class action lawsuit because of the litany of things that this drug is going to do to me, then why is it that I am repulsed by the idea of taking something in nature that was put here by the creator, whoever you believe that creator to be? Why am I so violently opposed to this? And why am I believing these notions of addiction and debauchery and these negative results when those things are not proven? There is no tie between a lot of the negative things we were taught and this plant. There's a lot of hype, there's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of conversation, but none of those things are rooted in fact, right? And we like to deal with facts, but when it comes to cannabis, we throw fact right out the window and we get caught up in the emotion of it.
Hmm.
Your experience was the emotion of these people are blatantly violating the law right here in my face, and now they're forcing it on me.
Right.
I'm not gonna lie to you. I am an advocate for cannabis, and I don't like the smell.
Hmm.
So I am one of those. I don't like the smell. I don't like the fact that if I go out somewhere, that I come home smelling of cannabis. I'm still trying to work my way through that. However,
Hmm.
I am still a very staunch advocate of it, and not just from a medicinal purpose or perspective, but also from a recreational perspective for adults, right? Because
Hmm.
people like to take your words when you say something like that and sort of twist them around on you. And all of a sudden, I'm advocating for 4-year-olds to smoke crack in the gym. And that's not
Right.
at all what I stand for when I say restorative justice.
Hmm.
But back to that restorative piece, seeing people create unquestionable wealth in Seattle while I'm seeing
Yes.
being deported and
Let's talk
separated
about it. Let's talk about it.
from Arizona was just unacceptable to my constitution. I mean,
Yes.
I'm like, there is no way you have billions of dollars flowing. You have people who are creating their entire family's legacy in one state, while in another state, you have people whose families are being ripped apart over the
Yes.
same land. We need to get it together. And that's
So
how, you know,
I'll tell you where that for me, this is where the light bulb went off for me. So John Boehner left government, and you guys remember that, right? And the next time that I saw John Boehner, it was an ad that John Boehner had placed offering to teach people how to become wealthy in the business of cannabis.
and that disgusts me. It
Yes.
disgusts me because, you know, a lot of us have these enlightening moments and enlightening stories. I myself have a moment where the light bulb went on and I stopped looking at this as deviant behavior and started recognizing it for what it was. That doesn't bother me. What bothers me is the audacity of people, especially people who were instrumental in convicting and condemning and disenfranchising certain populations, turning around and without any grace, without any humility, without any apology, turning around and asking you for money, turning around and telling you how you can make your business work, turning around and showing off the wealth that they can create when they have not addressed the harm that they've done. That for me is it's nauseating. It's sort of like the politicians who stand up with tearful eyes and tell you now that they're pro cannabis because their husband, child, brother, spouse has cancer. And I'm like, it's no more important today that it affects you than it was yesterday when it didn't affect you. So
Correct.
although I applaud your change in perspective, I need you to be more humble. I need you to be more apologetic. I need you to address the fact that you were instrumental in the devastation of another life. And now you want everyone to turn around and follow you because it affects you.
Correct. Yeah. And that was for me, that was the shocker. I was like, okay. I was like, so if I'm not mistaken, the party that you left government as a part of was responsible for jailing, imprisoning generations of Black men for the same thing. Am I incorrect in that remembrance?
No, no, and I'll give you one more. There are still people who sit in prison, and it's still staggering. You know, it's not. You know, some people are like, "Oh, yeah, now we have legalization." Even in some states where we have legalization, you still have a big problem. You have people who are sitting in prison right now, and you still have people who are being arrested right now. So we still haven't gotten it together, and we still haven't gotten it right. One of the things that the NABCL does is partner with folks that are in advocacy, and one of the groups that we recently partnered with was the Last Prisoners Project, and they do a lot of, you know, we have volunteer attorneys that go in and work to overturn convictions, to expunge records, and basically to help restore, which is where the term restorative justice comes from, help restore people to a position that gives them an opportunity to participate in society. Because in a lot of cases, even if they weren't unduly jailed, because in essence, if you break the law, that's the risk you take when you break the law. So I want to be very clear that I'm not advocating for breaking the law. However, when you look at the punishment that people receive for breaking a law that shouldn't have been a law to begin with, it's rather outrageous, right? You know, you have armed gunmen who shoot up schools who see no jail time, and you have people who smoke a plant and see jail for the rest of their lives. That makes no sense. And for me, I'm like, make it make sense.
Right, make it make sense. Okay, so let's get into the business part. So we've talked a little bit about restorative justice. We've talked about, you know, how it can be beneficial from a medicinal standpoint, but I really want to focus on all of the non-traditional ways that people can get into the cannabis business. You know, for myself, like I'm just not really a consumer, right? I'm not a person who consumes cannabis on a regular basis. I don't know much about it, but I do have a waste company. So am I able to transition my waste business into cannabis? And let's talk about some of those industries where you can transition or, kind of add a cannabis element to the business. So I'm going to give you the floor and let you just kind of talk us through kind of how that looks.
Sure. I talked earlier about being excited by advocacy, and I absolutely am. But I'm also excited by, as I said, the learning piece, right? I often say to people that I can think of very few industries that aren't cannabis industries. So I tell folks all the time, every business is a cannabis business. Sit down with me for 10 minutes, tell me what you do, and I'll tell you how you can relay that to cannabis. Um, you mentioned waste, absolutely. One thing that's happening, and it's happening rapidly, you're seeing entire industries that have to pivot to accommodate, right? So cannabis has to be handled a very specific way. It's not handled the same way in every state, but you've got to dispose of it properly, right? Because although, as I said, that this is something that adults should be able to choose to consume and to use, you also want to make sure you aren't disposing of your waste in such a way that it gets into the hands of children, that it gets seeps into the environment, that someone who doesn't want to participate in cannabis, whether it would be to their benefit or not, is not inadvertently affected by that, right?
Mhm.
There are ways of disposing of things. So if you have a waste company, if you are a Trash Logic, there are ways you can fit your company to accommodate the requirements within your state so that you can service people in the cannabis industry. That's a beautiful thing. There are, for people with a small business or people with any size business, you can actually build out an entirely different division or department of what you're currently doing today that will bring in part of this huge stream of income. Billions and billions of dollars are already flowing at this point, and we're not even federally legal yet. We don't even have 50 states that have a medicinal program, let alone full-time cannabis use for
Wow.
recreational. So if we are already in multi-billions of dollars right now, it's staggering to think of where we'll be once we get our act together. And we're going to need waste companies that deal specifically with cannabis and that can handle that. We need those now. And so it's a way to augment what you're already doing. I often have spoken to you, Lanika, and to other people about other areas. And it's usually things people don't think about, right? We think about, people think cannabis business, they automatically think of farms and dispensaries. If they're really thinking outside the box, they might think about delivery. What they don't think about is even within that cannabis structure, you need accountants that understand the tax implications. You can't go to any accountant and ask them to take care of your books if you're a plant touching business. The reason is we're still not federally legal. So there are
Mm.
all types of pockets of law that you have to be very careful about. If your accountant or your CPA doesn't understand what 280E is, that's not someone who should be helping you with your plant touching company, because that's going to be very instrumental. As a cannabis business, you can't write off your business expenses like you would in any other type of business, right? For instance, I'll give this as an example. A lot of people don't necessarily understand that there is a difference between CBD and THC.
Mhm.
Now, without getting into the weeds, sorry, I had to do it without getting into the weeds about it. They all come from the cannabis plant. They're all cannabis, right? But we have to name one CBD because that's how we've made it acceptable or palatable, right? And the other THC. If I have a CBD business, I can write off things all day long: my payroll, my rents, all of my normal business expenses. But once I get into that THC space, right, I can no longer write those things off. That makes a huge difference when planning your business. You don't
Yes, it does.
not realizing that's the case. For that matter, real estate. People don't think about being a cannabis real estate. That's a completely booming area. Reason being, when you are in a state where it's legal, it's not just legal to, I can't just put up a shingle anywhere and start selling cannabis from that spot, right? There are all types of laws and regulations that go into saying where I can be. I have to be a certain distance away from schools. I have to be a certain distance away from churches. I have to be a certain distance away from rehab centers. And if I'm dealing with Joe Schmo real estate, and they're unaware of those things, they're unaware of those laws, then guess what? I can wind up getting myself in quite a bit of hot water. And more importantly, I may lose whatever leg up I had in trying to get my license or trying to maintain my license. So you want to work with people who understand and know these things.
That's so important. So I didn't know the piece about I didn't know the piece about accountants, that you have to make sure that you have the right accountant. That is so important for people to understand. Because if I were to just, take this to my accountant, she might say, no, I'm not going to, because I'm, like I said, I already have an established business, right? So my thought process is, I already have a waste business. There's a need for waste companies in the cannabis space. So I'll just add that to my offering. Well, my current accountant might say, absolutely not. Right?
Right.
So that's something to think about.
Even more frightening, you may have an accountant that either doesn't realize they don't know it, that's the really scary kind, or
Mm,
realizes they don't know it but isn't forthcoming with you. So you have to
right.
be aware of that, right? It's important for you to be aware of it. And it's tricky, right? Because no one really has years and years of experience with this because it's new for everyone.
Okay.
And even those that have been at it for a while, and I'm talking mostly about the folks that you'll find out on the West Coast where they've had legalization for a decade or more, they are very versed in their area. But you've got to realize what they're doing in California is not what they're doing in Colorado, is not what they're doing in New York, is not what they're doing in Connecticut, is not what they're doing in Florida. Every state is different. So, taking that into consideration, you very likely will have to work with someone who's new. I tell people don't necessarily think of the newness as something to be feared because most of us are new, right?
Hmm.
99.9% of us are brand spanking new, and
Right.
0.5% is newish. Uh,
Right.
so it's okay to work with someone who's new as long as that someone is in tune, is diligent about learning the industry and being a part of the makeup of that industry, and that they breathe, sleep, drink, and eat what it is that they're working on. If you're
Mm,
working with someone who's transparent about, look, I've only done a handful of these, or I've done 3 of these, or I'm new to this, but this is what I've done to prepare myself, I think
mhm.
that's a little less scary to me than someone who comes to you with the arrogance of, I've been doing this for years. Because I can
Right.
guarantee you, the person who tells you, I've been doing this for years, is probably lying to you if you're a
Hmm.
state that recently got legal. If you're in a California, in a Colorado, in a Washington state, it's a little bit different there. You do have people that have the acumen and the knowledge in those particular markets. And some of that is translatable. I'm not saying that someone with their experience in Washington can't help you in Alabama, but understand that Alabama is new to them because Alabama is new to Alabama.
Right.
So
Right.
don't get caught up in their hype and their marketing and their propaganda because it's going to be new. They cannot just pick up their California model and plop it into Maryland. It's not going to work, right?
And I
Because
think a lot of people do that, right? And a lot of people use it as marketing. They'll say, well, I've been doing this in California, so I'm just moving to a new market and doing it here. And I think it's important that to make that distinction. What you just said, just because you did it in California does not mean that you're doing it, you're going to do the same thing in another state. Because if you do something that is allowed in California that is not allowed in Alabama or in Texas or in Chicago, right? You may be violating the law
absolutely.
inadvertently.
And the person who will pay for that is the business owner, right? And
Right.
you want to be careful about that. It's not the same as opening, if I have a nail salon in North Carolina and I decide to open another nail salon in New Jersey, well, yeah, there will be some regulations that'll be slightly different, but it won't be a completely different animal, right?
Hmm.
It won't be like, all right, well, what can I advertise? Can I not advertise? What kind of packaging can I use? You also have to understand that opening another office in another state is also different with regards to cannabis because we don't have interstate commerce. So I can't pick up my product that is doing great in state A and just decide we're also going to sell said product in state B because
Mm-hmm.
the lack of federal legality means that I don't have a way to transport what I'm doing here to here. So I really got to recreate what I've done in state A, in state B, starting from scratch. And again, that is if you are plant touching. And remember, there is a distinction because you can be involved in the cannabis industry without dealing with any of these headaches if you're not plant touching. That's
Right.
talking about being a real estate agent, for instance. That's not a plant touching business. You don't need a license through the cannabis channels. You just need your license through the real estate channels, right? But
So
you,
let's talk about real estate. How are people using cannabis in the real estate industry?
oh my gosh, it's very, very fascinating. So with regards to that, I would say that the tracks are from an investment standpoint. So if I have the savvy, if I am on top of what's happening in my state, and I have an idea of where they're going to allow for green zones, and green zones are generally the locations where I can open a dispensary, for instance. If I have
Mhm.
a good idea of where those places are going to be and I have the means to do it, one of the smartest things I can do is start buying up property, right? Because when that dispensary needs to open up, they're going to need a property in a green zone. If I've bought up the properties in that green zone, guess what? They're going to have to come through me in order to open up that dispensary because they're either going to have to buy or lease through me. So it's a brilliant place to get ahead of the game if you're able to do so. Same for farmlands for cultivators. Like you can really, really study what's happening in your state and utilize that with your own knowledge of real estate to absolutely dominate in that market. Um, and the other piece of real estate would be like real estate agents. If I know and already have the relationships as a real estate agent to help get you into a green zone, that might put you ahead of someone else who's got another application going for their cannabis business, right? Because
Okay, I'm going to stop you real quick so that we can do a little bit of defining terms. So green zone, can you define a green zone for the audience? I know that you said what they are, but I want to make sure that it's, you said that they're defined as areas that can allow cannabis businesses to exist. But can you really talk about how those work and how you find out if you're in a green zone?
absolutely. So again, keep in mind that every state is going to be different, and with that, a terminology may be somewhat different. It may not be referred to as a green zone where you are, but what you would want to look into is what are the rules that are being created as it pertains to where you can have a plant touching business, right? So if I'm interested in opening a dispensary, every state that I'm aware of, you have to be a certain distance from hospitals, from places of worship, from rehab facilities, from schools. You have to have, whether it's 500 feet or whatever that distance is, and that's going to be determined by the regulators in your state or in the region. You have to be a certain distance away, and so that circumference, that distance, is what creates a green zone. You can be anywhere within that green zone, but you can't be outside of that circle of places.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. So I have a question. I see Jamel is in the room. So, and I'm thinking in terms of businesses like Jamel's. So Jamel has an infused cocktail drink.
Mhm.
So if I was a liquor store and I wanted to carry Jamel's product, um, would I have to be, just to carry his product, would I need to be in a green zone, or could I carry it because I have a liquor store?
Well, it's probably not going to work that you can carry it just because you're a liquor store, because that gets into licensing issues. And again,
Mm,
it gets a little tricky, right? Because technically, you can only sell that from a dispensary. And I don't know of any place that is allowing liquor stores to also automatically be dispensaries. So
mm,
So those are some of the nuances that someone would need to be familiar with to be able to direct you. Okay, liquor store A wants to carry this product. It is a plant touching. There are probably a whole host of things that that liquor store has to go through in order to qualify as a dispensary. So that's tricky, right? From an
Mhm.
advocacy perspective, that's one of the things that advocates have to look at, right? As we create the federal landscape, we have to be aware that liquor stores are going to want to do this. And we have to
Mhm.
determine from a federal level, do we want liquor stores to do this? Or do we want to say, nope, liquor stores, stay in your lane. You need to be a liquor store. And so, liquor that's infused, you need to go through the channel of going to be part of a dispensary. And there are reasons for that, right? There are safety concerns. In the state of North Carolina, I cannot go into a liquor store with a minor. But in the state of New Jersey, anybody can walk into a liquor store. You can't
Right.
purchase liquor, but you can go in there. And I know that that's a hot button issue for people. People have all these concerns that, oh, well, if we have this dispensary in our neighborhood, then our kids will get to it, which is actually a pretty irrational fear because you
Mhm.
have to be 18 to even walk into a dispensary in most states.
Mhm.
You have to show ID. I can walk into any liquor store without showing them a stick of ID. I may need to show them ID when I go to pay for it, but I can certainly go in there. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's a sticking point, and that's fear. It's a reaction based on fear and
Okay.
not thinking that through. But the reality is, you can't just think, okay, great, I'm going to jump on this cannabis bandwagon, and I now know about this great product. So, boo, we're going to sell it like we sell, Tito's. Nope, it's not Tito's. We're not going to sell it like we sell Tito's because Tito's doesn't have THC in it. Um,
Okay. So question on that same wavelength. So yesterday I stopped at a gas station and in the window there was a lighted sign, right? An illuminated sign that said, "We sell CBD." And I know you said CBD and THC are different. So it was basically a gas station that sells chips and they said CBD. So why are they able to do that?
So that that right now is a hot button item. If you know anything or have been following anything with what's happening with Delta 8, Delta 9, Delta 10 right now, that's part of what a lot of people are arguing.
Okay,
Um,
I have not been because I don't know what Delta 8 is. That's an airline to me. So you want to explain to me and the rest of the audience who what Delta 8 is?
So again, not to get too lost in the technicalities and the science of it all, there is a naturally derived cannabinoid. Cannabinoids are part of the elements of the cannabis plant that affect you, and they have the medicinal properties. They can affect you from a hallucinogenic standpoint. And that's what a lot of the studies that are currently happening to understand more about this plant are looking at. They're looking at these cannabinoids and how they affect you. The cannabinoids themselves interact with neurotransmitters, which are in your body, and that interaction causes, uh, relaxation, or it causes heightened thought and awareness, or it reduces pain or reduces inflammation. It's the cannabinoids and how they interact with the neurotransmitters that ultimately result in a lot of the things that people talk about when they talk about the effects of CBD and cannabis. When I said they come from the same plant, they truly do. Um, Back in 2014, there was a farm bill that was passed. This was passed on the federal level, right? So that means across the country, regardless of what your belief system is and whether Nancy Reagan told you to say no to drugs or not, you had no choice. The bill passed, and that allowed for CBD, which has less than 0.03% dry weight of cannabis, to be legal everywhere in the country. Right. We also got a farm bill in 2018, which augmented the 2014 law, and now we're in sort of a different limbo state, and that's undergone shifts now. What that meant was, as long as you had less than a certain amount of THC in the product you were selling, then it did not fall under the Schedule 1 ruling that said that it was no medicinal value, it was highly addictive, it was a gateway drug. It fell outside of that because it reached beneath a certain threshold, right? What what folks found out was you can still get a lot of the hallucinogenic effects by sort of working with the naturally occurring THC that's found even in CBD products with that low level. And there is what's called delta 8, there's delta 9, which is what we normally associate with regular marijuana weed, and delta 10. There are a lot of other, different variations in there, but those are three of the more popular ones that allow for a hallucinogenic effect, right? Well, because the product that is being sold still falls beneath that threshold of the 0.03% dry weight, they're able to sell products that do have a hallucinogenic effect, right? And that's kind of tricky because you don't want your gas station to sell gummies to your 12-year-old, which they
Right.
can currently do, that contain a hallucinogenic. That is going kind of unchecked. And so, even though I work with a lot of people that are in this space, even the people in the space that are in the hemp space recognize that some form of regulation does need to occur. Um, they're all for capitalism, but they also don't want to see people inadvertently harmed or people taking something they don't understand and taking it the wrong way because it can have a negative effect. I pop
Right.
those gummies, don't know what I'm doing. I get in my car to go drive. Someone can get hurt. And I don't think anyone wants to see that.
Right.
Of course,
So
there
let me go to another industry. So, because I don't want to run out of time. So let's talk about, you mentioned media earlier. We talked about media and marketing. So someone in the media space, how would that work for them? How would they get into the industry?
Okay. Well, I separate media and marketing because, like, if I have a beauty product and I want to slap a billboard off of the highway, I just pay for that billboard and there goes my ad, right? You can't do that with cannabis and cannabis products in the same way because depending on your state or depending on your region within that state, there are laws on how they want things advertised. They don't want things advertised. Some places are adamant about, we don't want your packaging to look like Fruity Pebbles because that's going to attract kids. We need you can't have big flashy neon lights that say that you're a dispensary. You have to have a subdued tone. And then other places are like, have at it, advertise how you want to. So being versed in how to handle marketing and how to handle advertisement within that cannabis space to both be compliant with the laws, but also to reach your target audience is important. And so that's a niche area that you can get into. And it's super important because cannabis doesn't have one look anymore. I know a lot of people like to think, oh, you smoke cannabis, you're a pothead. And there are all these negative connotations. But cannabis today, right now, and as it's continuing to grow across the world, is your 80-year-old grandmother with glaucoma, your 7-year-old daughter with epilepsy. It's your 30-year-old with anxiety. It doesn't look like one thing, and not every, what's going to attract me as a client is probably not what's going to attract another client because they're not going to be interested in the things that I'm interested in. I'm not a smoker. I'm not going to be interested in what it is that they're interested in because I don't use my lungs that way. So, so knowing how to market and how to reach your target audience, it's not as simple as saying, I've smoked weed since I was 13. I know this plant and therefore I'm going to open a business. I'm not saying you can't do that. What I'm saying, though, is don't think that that's going to carry your business. You still need business acumen. You still need
Right.
to surround yourself with people who know how to run a business. You still have to be a successful business person. The fact that you grew 3 plants in your dorm room when you were in college does not make you a cultivator. It makes you someone who can grow 3 plants in your dorm room in college.
Right.
Understanding that sometimes is a little shocking to people, right? Because right now there's sort of this heated space between those that come from just a corporate level who have no engagement with the plant, never knew the plant, know nothing about the culture, and they want to impose these rigid cultural, predetermined boxes because they used to have a cigarette company, and now all of a sudden they think that makes them the person to sell cannabis. It doesn't work that way. But by the same token, if you used to, hustle on the street, that doesn't mean you're ready to open a multi-million-dollar company.
Right.
There has to be an in-between for both of these different groups of people. And whereas the legacy market is not only, and that's when you hear legacy market, it's in reference to the people who have been doing this, who are part of the culture, and who were doing it before it was legal, right? You can look at that however you want, but people from the legacy market, they do know the plant. They know the plant, they know a lot about how the plant interacts, but they don't necessarily know the science. They don't
Right.
necessarily know the business side. And so the pairing of the business folks and the legacy folks is probably a good idea if that's done well. But what I don't want to see is I don't want people who are in the legacy market to be taken advantage of by people on the business side. And I don't like seeing when business folks sort of use what they need to from the legacy market and then cast them aside. Because I am very conscious of the fact that there is still an insult and injury dynamic when the very people who were condemning you are now trying to sell you a product that they
Right.
already. There's
So I saw this in action. I was in, I'm in DC today, but I was in California, and I had a visit by a young man that was opening a dispensary, and we were having a conversation, and I started asking him. He came to me for just some business advice. So I started asking him questions about why he was opening up the dispensary, why he was opening it up, where he was, where he had planned to open it, his, location, all of those things. And I found through that conversation that there were a group of men that were not Black men that were trying to capitalize on a grant that was being provided to Black business owners in the cannabis space. And they had tapped him to be kind of the face of it, to make sure that they were able to get these funds to be able to do, what they were doing. So have you seen that happening a lot in the cannabis space?
Unfortunately, that happens a lot. There are most certainly unscrupulous people out there. There are some well-intended people out there too. So I don't want to castigate everyone as unscrupulous, but I will say there are absolutely, and that is something that many people have been vocal about. And I have to applaud those in the advocacy space and the folks who are, they're just not having it. They are not here for it. And they're very vocal about the fact that we see you. We see you trying to buy our melanin. We see you trying to buy our estrogen, because that's how I couch these things, right? There are some people
Mhm.
who MO is very predatory in that there are allotments that are made for minorities. There are
Yes.
allotments made for women. There are allotments made for vets, people who have otherwise been disenfranchised, either in business in general or specifically in the cannabis space. People have been disadvantaged. For the most part, most states are looking to create a way of creating some sort of equity and balance, right? And in so doing, there are some set asides that allow people from these otherwise marginalized groups to get a foothold in the door. And as I talked about, when those people do not have business acumen and don't necessarily have the finances and the resources to make it happen, there are some predatory folks that will swoop in and say, hey, we can qualify as minority, or we can qualify as a woman owned, or we can qualify as a vet if we bring someone in. You know, New York did a very interesting thing in that they opened up the first few licenses to people with prior convictions for nonviolent cannabis convictions. And in so doing, it became all of a sudden became quite alluring. You know, usually that's not something you put on the top of your resume, right? You're not going to put got locked up for weed. But
Right.
all of a sudden, it became very appealing to have that, because what happened was the first 100 licenses went to people in that state. So guess what? If I'm company A over here and I want to wiggle my way into New York, and I don't have a record, no one on my staff has a record. As a matter of fact, we've done a damn good job making sure that no one affiliated with our company has a record. Now, all of a sudden, guess what we want? We want in on those first 100 slots, right? So, what's the smartest thing we can do? Find someone with a record. That can be really, really dangerous. And sometimes, um, the offer or the apple or the olive branch that's being extended is so attractive that the person on that receiving end doesn't realize that in essence they're being used. They're being used. The person is simply buying either their melanin or their vet status or their estrogen so that they can get into an industry. And that's not really what those set asides were made for. That's not who they were looking to service. It's one thing for me as a company to mentor someone and to extend an opportunity for that person to benefit. But when my sole purpose is to basically jump the line and get ahead of everyone else who should be there in that space, then you really have to question the ethics of that company. And so,
Right.
unfortunately and sadly, we see that all too often. But like I said, this isn't your average nail shop. The people from the cannabis culture are very aware, very awake, and very much not having it. So
Okay.
they are exposing the people who are doing this, and I applaud that, rightfully so. They
Hmm.
should be exposing people doing that because that's just it's unfair. It's unfair and it's not right.
Well, Natasha, we're running out of time, so I want to kind of bring this home. Some of the things that we defined and will be in the transcript that will be posted on ceoschool.live are things like 280E, which was an accounting term, the green zone, Delta 8, legacy market, things like that. So we'll put all that into the chat, and then if there are other definitions that you'd like us to include, let us know, because we'll put that also in the transcript. But I wanted to kind of go through with you maybe just the basics. We have about 15 minutes. What are the basics that people that want to get into the cannabis business, what do they need, their foundation, what do they need to do? I always say every business person needs a business plan, right? So we've talked about that before. I know they need a business plan. Besides a business plan, what are the other things that they need?
I think even before you get to your business plan, think about how you want to be involved in this. Like I said before, there are two different lanes. The lane that is the plant touching lane, I'm going to tell you right now, it's a tough battle. It's not an easy place to be. Don't be limited by, oh, I want to get into cannabis, so I'm going to go into cultivating. If you've never farmed, you've never raised anything, the fact that your children are alive is a good thing, but you can't even grow a cactus in your home. You don't need to go and try to start a cultivating business. Think about what else you have, right? So if you're a photographer, we need those. If you're into beauty products, we need that. Food and beverage, we need that. So those are ways that you can still get into cannabis without having to be a farmer. So really, as you create this business plan, be realistic about who you are, what you enjoy, what you're drawn to, what your strengths are, and what your passion is, because that will help you to create your business, and you won't be limited by thinking, oh, I've got to do one of these three things. No, you don't have to do one of those three things. You can create your own lane because this is so new and so open. So I would say that's a key part of it. Once you've done that sort of assessment, you can start fleshing out a business plan, but also think about the people around you that you trust, that you know, and that have the skill sets you need. Um, it is wonderful to partner with family and friends, but if your family and friends are not going to add to your business, don't, be careful about how you place them within your business structure. Um, Key, which I tell everyone in any sort of business relationship, is make sure you have things in writing. Make sure you have crossed your T's, dotted your I's. So you have your trademarks together. You've taken care of how you create your name. Be careful with that. Remember that cannabis right now is still Schedule 1. So if you name your business Weeds Are Us, you're going to have difficulty opening a bank account, right? So you've got to be smart about those types of things. Don't do things that are really kitschy and kind of too gimmicky, because that's not going to. There's about a million different can of this and can of that and can of the other thing. Be a little
Hmm.
bit more creative than that so you do stand apart. You want to build your team with a real specific and intelligent thought process and an intelligent eye on who will help to propel you forward. You definitely want to involve yourself in the community you think you want to be in. So if you live in, I don't know, Chicago, for instance, get to know who's in Chicago in this space. Get to know who the decision makers are, right? Because a lot of this is relationship based. There are so many networking opportunities and seminars and webinars and conferences and conventions that you can go to, and you meet people and you see the same people. And those are great ways to build relationships. Those are great ways to not only learn the industry, but to learn who's in the industry so you can see what kind of partnerships make sense, what types of relationships make sense, and how can I grow my business by being in relationship with others.
And I want to say that I don't care what your business is, whether you're in cannabis or you're in any other business, networking is so important. I always tell people that when you are in business and you are trying to retain customers, retention is really important, right? You don't want to always be looking for new customers. You want to form relationships with people that are going to be repeat buyers. And so it's really important to get 3 deep. That's why it's important to network. You do want to go to those conferences because you want to be visible. You want to go to those seminars. You want to go to networking events that are within your industry. If people invite you out, go out, have a drink, go out, have dinner. It's important to be 3 deep. What do I mean by 3 deep? There's always going to be a decision maker, right? That person who actually signs the check. You're also going to have a person who influences that decision. And then you're going to have a person who's just like, the cheerleader, somebody who is going to hype you up, right? I call that your hype man. So you want to be 3 deep. You want to have somebody who's like really an advocate for you, right? That's your hype man. You want to have that person who's the influencer, who's going to influence that decision maker. And then you want to have that person who's going to write the check. And that's why networking is really important, because if you don't have those 3, what happens is, especially in business, because I'm not just talking about, I want to get into the cannabis industry. So, Derek is buying my product. No, I'm not talking about Derek. I'm talking about if you're getting into business and you're trying to build strategic relationships, you got to have somebody that is going to still have your back if Derek leaves that organization, right? So if you're in transportation and you have a contract with a cannabis business and that decision maker leaves or that influencer leaves, who do you still have that's going to advocate for you inside that organization? So you always want to be 3 deep. I see you wrote 3D. Jocelyn is 3 deep, DEEP. I hope that made sense. Does that make sense to you, Natasha?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it makes me think of something else, though. This is something specific to cannabis, and I've seen this a lot. Networking is very important, but be smart about your networking. I cannot tell you how many people who profess to be business people do so while also getting high with the people they're supposed to be doing business with. You
Right.
got to be very, very careful. You might be the fun party person, and everybody might love you. They might love being around you because you are the life of the party, but they're not going to do business with you because
Right.
no one wants a high accountant. No one wants a high lawyer, and no one's writing you a check if you are high everywhere you go and you smell of cannabis. That's
Right.
being very honest with you and very transparent. At the end of the day, you're going to do what you're going to do. And I'm not telling you to live a false life, but be very, very clear that when you put yourself out there as a business, you need to represent yourself as a business. You don't see the CEO of alcohol companies. You don't see the Bacardis getting trashed and presenting themselves as trash. I'm not saying they don't go to corporate parties and have a drink or two. I'm just saying they don't walk around slurring because
Right.
it makes no sense. It's just no one worth their salt is going to want to do business with you in that arena. So be very careful about that when you are going to be a business person, when you're the face of a company. You want to be aware of how you present yourself.
Yes.
Um,
I love it. So I'm going to wrap up now, but I'm so excited. This was such a good conversation. I learned so much, and this isn't even the first time we've talked about this, and I learned so much even this time. So I think every time we talk, I learn something new. I just am so blessed to have you as part of my network, and you're just, your intelligence and your insight and your wisdom has always been so special to me. And I want to thank you so much for coming to CEO School, not only as a contributor, but also as an expert time and time again. So I really appreciate you, Natasha.
Thank you so much. Again, it's always a pleasure to be here. I love talking about this stuff, right? So I love talking about weed, but I love also like sort of engaging. And I think that what you offer through CEO School, what you offer people in terms of growing their businesses and doing so with excellence is such a huge benefit to people. I'm just glad I had a chance to be a part of it. So thanks
I
for
love it. And so I will be making the announcement across all social networks, but Natasha has agreed to become part of our permanent faculty. So she will be added to the website as our resident legal expert, and she will be teaching a class every month. So thank you guys so much for being here and being a part of the CEO School family. I'm excited to come back next week. We're starting a series on leadership. It is a challenge. Every week you will have a new leadership challenge. Jocelyn and I have been working on your presentation slides and your homework assignments. So I'm super excited to bring that to you guys next week. So tell a friend to tell a friend to come to CEO School, because we are building and scaling businesses over here. So if you guys have any questions for me, feel free to hit my DMs. Follow me at Lanika Johnson on Instagram and on Fanbase and on Pinterest and on YouTube. And is there anything else that I'm missing, Jocelyn?
Your Instagram, your Facebook page.
Facebook, LinkedIn, Lanika Johnson. It's my whole name all together. I am excited to be on this journey with you and see the kinds of businesses that you build. I am really, really proud of those of you who have been part of the school for, the greater part of a year or more. And even those that are newer, you guys make me proud every day. I follow you on social media and I see what you're doing, and I'm super excited to see your growth. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of that journey. And I hope you guys have a blessed Friday and a great weekend. I'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Lanika. Bye, guys.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Natasha.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye. All right. Bye, Jamel. All right, it's just us now. Let me stop
Are you
Facebook.
still live on Facebook?
Yeah,